Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh in the Studio West on this Wednesday. I got a lot to cover today, and we've got a lot of great guests, including Senator Tom Cotton, Senator James Lankford, and many other people. Chuck Box is back to talk about his brand new book, Battle Mountain. We got a lot going on, but I want to begin with what happened yesterday. Donald Trump issued another executive order. This executive order from President Trump is named Ensuring Accountability for All Agencies. It's very significant. It's very significant because it's a direct challenge to independent regulatory agencies. Now, please don't get bored. I'm going to try and make this as brief and as interesting as possible. I'll begin by saying the very first class I had as an undergraduate in the fall of 1974 was the first class in Gov 30 taught by Professor James Q. Wilson. It was about the Interstate Commerce Commission. Now, the Interstate Commerce Commission was formed in 1887 to regulate railroads. It no longer exists. It's been folded into the Department of Transportation, but it was an independent agency, meaning it did not take direction from the president, and therefore it was a forerunner, a precursor of what would become an explosion. I think there are more than 50 now. I was just making a list during the break. There's the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. There's the Administrative Conference of the United States. There's the Merit Systems Protection Board. There is the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Federal Trade Commission, Consumer Product Safety Commission, Federal Election Commission. It goes on and on and on. And they're not provided for in the Constitution. Article 1 of the Constitution says, here's the legislative authority vested in Congress. Here's what they can do. Article 1, Section 8. 18 different clauses, including a necessary and proper clause at the end, which is a catch-all. Justice Scalia called it the last refuge for whenever Congress wants to do something that is ultra vires, outside of its powers, they invoke the necessary and proper clause. But they have a bunch of powers. Congress can do a bunch of things. Then Article 2, there's one executive branch, and the president runs it. And then Article 3 is the judiciary. And then the rest of the articles deal with discrete issues. But 1, 2, and 3. Legislative, executive, judicial. There is no section for independent agencies. But Congress invented them, beginning in 1887, as a means of sort of delegating their power. And they're quasi-legislative, they're quasi-judicial, they're quasi-executive. They're an amalgam of all three branches of government. Well, what James Q. Wilson, who was a fabulous professor, he was born in Colorado. He began his teaching career at Harvard in, I think, 1961, and he kept at it until he went to UCLA in, I think, the 80s, and then he went to Pepperdine, and then he went back to BC. He died in 2012. But he was a fabulous lecturer and a brilliant man. His book, The Moral Sense, was basically his attempt to grapple with the idea of where does conscience come from. He was a fabulous lecturer as well. He made the Interstate Commerce Commission interesting, and it isn't. It's railroads, railroad rates. And why did the ICC come into business? But he made it interesting. And I've taught administrative law. I teach constitutional law now for 27 years. I have to deal with this peculiar world of independent agencies, which are not provided for in the Constitution. Well, Donald Trump, my guess is, at the prodding of Russ Vought, who is the director of the Office of Management and Budget, and a very smart guy, has issued this executive order, which says all executive departments and agencies, including so-called independent agencies, shall submit for review all proposed and final significant regulatory actions to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA, it's well known, at the Executive Office of the President. It's part of OMB. It does say it applies to the Federal Election Commission, but it does not apply to the Federal Reserve System or the Open Market Committee. To carve that out. It then goes on to say, and this is going to cause heartburn at all the independent agencies, Section 6, Paragraph B, the heads of independent regulatory agencies shall establish a position of White House liaison in their respective agencies. Such position shall be at grade 15 of the general schedule and shall be placed in Schedule C of the accepted service. That means they want a landing zone. They want a place where they can drop in a senior level political appointee, and grade 15 is not senior executive service, but it's pretty high. They'll be able to get some serious people to do this. And they want to drop one in at every independent agency. And the reason is transparent. They want to know what's going on. They want to call a flag when anyone is doing something like throwing gold bars off the Titanic, which is what they did at EPA during the transition. Administrator Zeldin made a video about that. EPA is not an independent agency. It's part of the executive branch. But there are political people, politicized people, ideological people who will do everything they can to resist the appropriate and direct directions of the president and or his designees, either out of the White House, executive office of the president, or as a cabinet secretary. And that's not the way the government's supposed to work. We have a unitary executive. Andy McCarthy and I talked about this yesterday. I would recommend that you go and watch the short video that Andy and I did on why it makes sense to make a direct charge at a case called Humphrey's Executor. Humphrey's Executor stands for the proposition that independent agencies, those which Congress has set up, governed by an individual or a board with a set term, who is not to be removed, either the individual or the board, except for cause, in fact, raise significant constitutional problems which have gone unaddressed for almost 90 years. Okay, that case, Humphrey's Executor, is a 1935 or 1936 case. And it was 9-0, so it wasn't close. Middle of the Depression, they're getting ready to make the switch in time that saves the 9, and the court's not going to mess around with an agency that gets created in the middle of the Great Depression or who's running it. They're not going to get bollocksed up in that, and they weren't going to give more power to FDR. That's a cynic's view of that, which is, boy, if we let FDR replace all the heads of the boards and the commissions, then he's going to have even more power, and he's already got both the Senate and the Congress. It's a very elaborate and interesting area. However, the bottom line, it's not what the framers intended. It's got nothing to do with the Constitution. Doesn't mean it's unconstitutional. It just means it has no explicit authority. Independent agencies do not exist in the Constitution. They are not part of the constitutional order. They are part of the development of constitutional law, but not that an originalist would say, thumbs up. And as Andrew McCarthy noted yesterday, at least two justices, Justices Thomas and Gorsuch, have indicated they're kind of uneasy with the idea of this vast armada of alphabet soup agencies having authority independent of everyone. And the Federal Trade Commission does, and so does the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and so does the Federal Elections Commission. They get their commissioners. The only check and balance is that the people who serve on that board have to go through Senate advise and consent. But they can go rogue, and they do go rogue. They go rogue under conservatives. They go rogue under liberals. They go rogue under Republicans. They go rogue under Democrats. They are an unusual creature of constitutional mythology. Now, myths are stories that are intended to be believed. We're supposed to believe that they can't be challenged. I don't believe that. I think it's time to have this discussion, and Donald Trump's removal of members of the Merit Systems Protection Board and the National Labor Relations Board has triggered this. There are 70 lawsuits in 1 month against Donald Trump. Some of them are easy. He can fire members of the executive branch at the head of an agency. Do you realize if he doesn't like the way any one of his appointees is acting, Attorney General Bondi, who's doing a good job, 2 weeks, who knows? It seems like it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, John Ratcliffe, it doesn't matter who, Marco Rubio. The president says, you're fired, they're fired. And there isn't any debate about that. They can be fired with 1 minute's notice, and they might not get any notice. They can be fired on X. They can be fired by a telegram. They can be fired. Not so, or at least our understanding is right now, about the independent agencies. Time to run a systems check because Congress has let it get away from them. They are not doing their job. They have delegated a lot of power. The non-delegation doctrine no longer has efficacy. Now, who knows? It might rise from the grave as well with the new court. As I've said many times, Donald Trump built the trampoline in his first term with 3 appointments to the Supreme Court. Now he's jumping on it. How high and how far can he go? What kind of tricks can he do? We're going to find out. And we're going to find out, I hope, in rather rapid fashion. Bottom line, don't believe the legacy media. Don't believe the hair on fire pundits. Nobody knows. I just laid out the law for you. I don't know. Nobody knows. We're going to wait on the Supreme Court. Stay tuned. I'm coming back with Senator Cotton.